Pumpkin Jim, or The Tale of a Busted Jackass Rabbit, from Bill Nye and Boomerang, or The Tale of a Meek-Eyed Mule and Some Other Literary Gems, by Bill Nye himself, published 1883. Chapter 1. Pumpkin Jim. It was evening in the mountains. The golden god of day was gliding slowly adown the crimson west. Here and there the cerulean dome was flecked with snowy clouds. The flecks were visible to the naked eye. Meanwhile, the golden god of day, hereinbefore referred to, continued to glide adown the crimson west, with about the same symmetrical glide. It had done so on several occasions previous to the opening of this story. The katydid was singing sleepily in the long grass, and the grizzly bear was trilling between 11 trills on the still air. It was a spot where the foot of man had never trod, and the undisturbed temple of nature, with its hallowed hush and never-ending repose. The lofty pines were swaying softly to and fro in the gentle breeze of evening, and the babbling brook went babbling along down its rocky bed in the bottom of the canon with a merry bab. All at once, like a flash of dazzling light, a noble youth came slowly down the mountainside, riding an ambling palfrey of the narrow-gauge variety with a paint-brush tail on him. That is, the palfrey, of course. The palfrey was a delicate buckskin color with high intellectual ears and a Roman nose. In crossing the stream, the palfrey stubbed his toe and fell on his noble rider, breaking the man's leg in 3 places and jamming one of his ribs through the liver and into the ground, thus pinning him to the earth and preventing him from rising. The buckskin palfrey, with almost human foresight and wonderful intelligence, found a soft place in the grassy bottom and lay down. There, in the slanting rays of declining sun, and stretched out upon the sedgy brink of the clear mountain stream, far from the reach of man and miles beyond the outer line of civilization, lay Pumpkin Jim, the yipping, yelling yahoo of Dirty Woman's Ranch. He lay there, partially submerged in the stream and partially in the clear, bracing atmosphere. Wild-eyed and beautiful he lay there, looking up into the glad realms of space with that murderous glitter in his eye that wins a woman's love and the sympathy of kind-hearted philanthropists. Occasionally he would raise his broken limb and try to use it, but it generally wilted and drooped like the leg of a rag doll. Then he would struggle to raise himself up and drag his body out upon the bank, but the broken rib would tear out large chunks of his liver and make him feel wretched and unhappy. "Curses upon thee, thou base and treacherous mule!" he murmured, brokenly. "By my beard, thou hast poorly repaid me for my unremitting kindness to thee. Ah, alack, alack, alack!" He was about to alack some more when a mellow girlish voice came floating down the gulch and fell in large fragments near where he lay. He gathered up some of the chunks of melody to see what the song might be. It was that wonderful masterpiece of Mozart's, "When Johnny Comes a-Marching Home." Then he swooned. The gurgling brook still continued to gurg. We will let it gurg. Chapter 2. Geraldine Carboline O'Toole. The melodious voice referred to in the preceding chapter was owned and operated by Geraldine Carboline O'Toole, the heroine of this classic tale. Anon she came down the valley like a thing of life. The limber sunbonnet which she wore had drifted to leeward and revealed her Grecian profile and peeled nose. All at once her fawn-like eyes fell upon the prostrate figure, pale and still, its toes turned toward the center of the zodiac. A wild, frightened look came into her starry eyes, and a ghastly pallor overspread her young face, throwing her intellectual freckles into strong relief. She stole forward and looked at the pale face of Pumpkin Jim as it lay upturned with the rosebud mouth slightly ajar like the mouth of the Mississippi River. Then she stooped and, dipping some of the clear, cold water in his hat, poured it into the rosy mouth. Slowly it trickled down his throat, and the wild panic and surprise created in his stomach by the novel fluid brought him speedily to consciousness. "Where am I, and whence cometh this burning sensation in my liver?" faintly murmured Pumpkin Jim. "Methought some new and peculiar beverage didst cool my parching throat." "Hist!" said Geraldine. "You must not excite yourself. You must brace up. Everything depends upon you keeping quiet instead of tearing up the ground with your broken rib." "And whence comest thou, O beauteous vision with the aurora borealis hair?" "Didst I not tell thee," said Geraldine, "that thou mustest not converse, but remain quiet? Let it suffice, however, that I strayed away from a Sabbath-school picnic at Cheyenne, and have wandered on carelessly for several 100 miles, wotting not whence I wist." By this time the day-god, which we left gliding slowly adown the crimson west, had glowed down the crimson west according to advertisement, and the solemn hush of the night was coming on, broken anon by the long dawn shriek of the mountain lion, or the pealing of thunder, which also reverberated anon through the otherwise solemn hush of night. Darkness came on apace. It would be folly to attempt to prevent it, so we will let it come on apace. Chapter 3. Startling Revelations. We will now suppose 24 hours to have passed since the scenes narrated in the last chapter. The gloaming is beginning to gloam. It began to look as though, if something were not done for Pumpkin Jim pretty previously, he would pass with a gentle gliding movement up the flume. He was growing fainter hour by hour, and the extreme torpidity of his liver gave rise to grave apprehensions on the part of his gentle guardian. His leg also gave him extreme pain and cause for uneasiness, to say the least. It had swollen to about the size of a flour barrel, and it was still swelling as we go to press. He opened his eyes with a low moan, and looked up to the limber sunbonnet. "Beauteous one, with the ethereal brow," he began, but Geraldine blushed and bade him let up. "Gentle lady," he began again, "I am aware that the crisis is near. Unless I have help very soon in some form or other, I shall have clomb the golden stair. Already the circulation is impaired, and the transverse duplex has ceased to vibrate. Dissolution is coming on. My pulse grows feebler hour by hour, and I feel that another morning sun will find only my earthly tenement here. My spirit will have wung its way to the realms of eternal day." "Oh, do not talk that way," sobbed Geraldine, filling her apron full of large, irregular fragments of grief. "It cannot, it must not be." "Do not be overconfident," said Pumpkin Jim. "Few men would have lived as I have, with a rib running through the centre of the liver and into the ground for 9 or 10 inches without great difficulty. The secret of my power of endurance I will, however, confide to you, as this may be positively my last appearance. My true name is not Pumpkin Jim. That is only a nom de plume. My sure enough name is Jesse James. That is the secret of my longevity. I have been killed a great deal. I have lost my life in almost every state in the Union. At first it used to make me gloomy and taciturn to be killed so much, but latterly I became very much pleased and flattered by this attention. It is sad to think, however, that after being killed by some of our most prominent men, I should at last yield up the ghost in a lonely cannon, at the urgent solicitation of a narrow-gauge mule. But enough! It is useless to repine. All that I am kicking about is, that after dying in so many different styles, and in such desirable conditions, surrounded by all the comforts of civilization, and getting a large amount of newspaper space, and having a patent medicine portrait of myself published in the papers, I should succumb to the death-dealing Jackass in the solitude of the mountains. I cannot die again, however, without telling you of my love. I might occupy your time by telling you of my long and glittering career of crime, but it would take too long. I have nothing to lay at your feet but my untarnished record as a highway robber, and my all-consuming love. It would ease the pain of my dying hour if you were to say to me that you returned my love." Our hero then fell back upon the mossy bank and gasped for breath, while to all appearances the last moments of Pumpkin Jim had come. It was a trying time for a young thing like Geraldine to pass through. She stooped over him and fanned him with her sunbonnet and whispered a few musical words in his ear. That did the business. Chapter 4. All's Well That Ends Well. The magic words that Geraldine emptied into Pumpkin James's ear roused him, and his eyes opened with their old diabolical light. A slight granting sound was heard. It was the broken bone of our hero's off limb coming back into its place and reuniting. His first words were, "Ah, Geraldine, you have brought me back to life. Now would you please look around and see if there is any cold pie in the house, my very ownest own?" This seemed to indicate that he had not fully recovered his mental faculties, as the most accessible cold pie was 327 miles from where then they were, and in a direct line. Geraldine, however, set herself at once about procuring food for her soul's idol. Taking some salt, she went out along the wooded slope to find a jackrabbit on whose tail she could throw the salt, thus securing him as an easy prey. She soon scared up one with a broken leg. Most all my gentle, refined, and intellectual readers of the Rocky Mountains have frightened from his lair at some point or another a jackrabbit with a broken leg. Jackrabbits with shattered limbs are very common in the West. Geraldine followed hopefully on, up hill and down, over low parks covered with hunch grass, across little mountain streams, through long stretches of greasewood and sagebrush, starting the owl from some blasted pine tree, or frightening the smiling coyote from his course. Onward and ever onward she flew like a hunted fawn. Her every motion was grace and poetry itself. The limber sunbonnet flopped to and fro with a merry runic flop, but the crippled John Rabbit did not tarry. For an invalid he seemed to make very fair time. Occasionally he would look around over his shoulder and laugh a merry taunting laugh. Then he would give his attention to getting over the ground. Geraldine got mad, and resolved to overtake her game and mete out him a horrible death. Now and then she would wildly throw a lump of salt in the direction of the fleeing rabbit, but it always failed to connect. It was indeed an exciting chase, and in fact is yet, for as we go to press, Geraldine is still madly pursuing the ostensibly disabled jackrabbit, with a handful of common table salt poised in the air, ready to throw upon the tail of her rapidly retreating adversary. Jesse James, alias Pumpkin Jim, waited a reasonable length of time for the return of Geraldine, but as she cometh not, he said, he arose, and bestriding his narrow-gauge mule, he rode away. He readily laid down his life again wherever he went, and although he died a miserable death in almost every corner of the earth, he never more met Geraldine Carbolino Toole, the Italian countess to whom he was betrothed. It is thought that she chased the crippled jackrabbit into the realms of space. This has been Pumpkin Jim, or The Tale of a Busted Jackass Rabbit, by Edgar Wilson Bill Nye. Narrated by Carter Lovelace. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.